He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back for another episode, Henry. Today, we're going to go back to the drawing board of fundamentals, nuts and bolts. We've talked in the past about your stress test that you put a creative brief through once you've written it. Let's back up and talk about some of the advice that you could give to, I would say, young as well as experienced brief writers on what you think about and what you do to prep before you ever put your fingers to the keyboard or pen to the paper to write your brief. What are some things that you go through before you even start?
So it's interesting, when you first brought up this topic to me, what I did was in my mind, I went back 5 years to when I got hired at the current agency I'm at, and went back and revisited some of the steps that I took as a new hire before I was asked to ever write a single brief. And I think it's good because this situation happens when you get hired at a new agency, when you land a new account, when you get transferred from one account to another. There's, I think, some things that you can do to get yourself up to speed, to build your knowledge base so that you can start having some working assumptions and some ideas before you're ever even tasked with writing a brief. Or perhaps you are tasked with writing a brief, but before you sit down and try to start filling out the boxes on the form, there's a few things that you can do. So in my case, I got hired at Zuby. Zuby's had been at that time doing the Hispanic advertising for the Ford Motor Company for over 20 years. And so Ford is a company with a 120-year track record. And one of the first things I did was I bought a couple of books on Amazon about Ford and its history, because to me, and if you go back to like Ritson and the way he approaches brand management, you really got to know the history of a brand in order to chart a future direction for the brand. It's nice to know where you've been so that there's a coherent place that you're going. So, obviously Wikipedia and Google are your friends, but also Amazon and depending on the brand, like if it's a new brand, it's not going to have that same history or the same amount of history that a brand like the Ford Motor Company has. But that was one of the first steps that I took. So that's kind of like looking back at history. The other part is current news. What's going on with the brand now? And you can do things like look at annual reports that usually have, they have all the financials in there, but there's usually some narrative there about what has happened in the past year, what the future goals of the company are. And along with annual reports, there's also investor conference calls. So like most big public companies have like if you go to their main website and you scroll down to the bottom or you look around, you search, there's a parallel website for investors. Sometimes it's investors.whatever.com, and you go there and that's where all like the 10K documents and all of the 1040s and all the publicly available information about the finances of the company are there. But also you'll see the schedule for investor phone calls, quarterly investor conference calls, and usually archived investor conference calls. And again, those are great because you get to hear the CEO himself usually talking about the goals of the company. Now, that's at a 20,000 foot level. The person that you're answering to in the marketing department might be several steps below, but somehow is being influenced by that CEO and that vision. Even if that client that you're directly reporting to doesn't listen to these investor calls, you're going to be smarter for having listened to them, and you're going to be able to speak the lingo that's being spoken inside
let me just interject before you go on with your list, because some of these things are truly relevant for marketers. You work in the ad agency world. I mostly train marketers when I do my workshops for the ANA, and marketers who are charged with writing briefs need to do these same things. So let me just emphasize that knowing the history of your brand is vitally important. I think it's easier for them to be aware of what's going on today, but I've encountered many marketers who are simply ignorant of their brand's history, anything that predates their arrival at the company. It surprises me how often that happens. So that's a really good point we should emphasize for marketers as well.
Yeah, I've always been a history buff. So
Mhm.
for me, it's second nature. It's like I want to know, like, how did this thing come about? How did it become popular? A brand like the Ford Motor Company is a treasure trove, right? Like this, it's been so intertwined with American culture, the 20th century, World War II, the design of Jeeps and mail trucks. Like there's so many different ways that the company has affected the country and been affected by the country, that for me it's pleasurable to do all of this research. Now, not every brand is like that, but you definitely want to get a sense of where the brand has been, who the founders were, what they believed in, because a lot of times what made a brand great at one time can make the brand great again if it's just presented in a different way, in a modern way, and in a coherent way to what consumers already think about the brand. So another thing that more recently has been a phenomenon is social media. So getting on social media and looking at what the brand has put out there, but also what people are saying about the brand,
Right.
is to me really important, because you get a sense of like whether people are satisfied or dissatisfied, what they're specifically dissatisfied about, understanding that, like anything, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So a lot of complainers out there complaining about, their Uber Eats got there cold or whatever. But, you have to take that with a grain of salt, but you can definitely learn something through social media. And then, of course, there's like the traditional research. You don't necessarily have to commission it. It probably has already been commissioned. It might be 5 years old, but it's a good place to start, is like to know where the brand was. And I'm talking about quantitative research like surveys, the qualitative research like focus groups and ethnographies and one-on-one interviews, and then whatever the syndicated data, if your agency subscribes to syndicated data, that's a great place to start and kind of educate yourself. Even when there's no brief to be written, you want to know certain things like who's buying this product, what are they, how are they different from people that aren't buying the product, what's the gender breakdown, what's their median household income, things like that you can get in syndicated data.
Let me just add
Go
to
ahead.
that. Back in the day when people used to write letters, snail mail, occasionally the ones who were really upset would write in a letter, and the PR department would kind of hang on to those. The equivalent today is they go onto social media, like you said, but also maybe less frequently, they send emails into the company, because there is a way to do that. And I've done training where I have heard from marketers who said, I got an email from one of our customers who bought our product, and this particular customer had some laudable things to say and asked me if I thought that was relevant for either their brief or for the creatives. I said, absolutely, especially if they're complaining about something legitimate or saying something positive about the product. So it's another, maybe less used, but emails to the company are, people don't take the time to do that. The ones who do have got something important to say.
Yeah, they're either really disappointed
Right.
because something, and I think that's the difference between like, oh, I'm just going to go on Twitter and torch X brand because I didn't like whatever happened, or sitting down and saying, listen, this on such and such a day I walked into your store, this is what happened. And in fact, it's funny, I have a story. I had a pharmacy client years ago, and they had just acquired Eckerd Drug here in Florida. And that's how I got involved, because they were launching into their first really big Hispanic market. And so CVS, they acquired Eckerd Drug, and Eckerd Drug had become, for all intents and purposes, the store of last resort for people. The prices were really high. It was like a convenience store pricing model, right? And customer service was horrible. If you needed a prescription, they would never call you to let you know it was ready. You'd show up, it wouldn't be ready. A lot of waiting around. It was terrible. And then CVS acquired them, and part of their takeover was, we're going to have a whole new pricing strategy. You know, we're going to make prices accessible, so you'll come here more frequently, not just when all the grocery stores are closed, or all the other alternatives are closed. And we're going to have prescriptions within an hour, and we're going to, but you know, there's a transition there. And so at one point I had to have a surgery, and I went straight from the hospital to the pharmacy to fill my prescription for the painkillers and the antibiotics and all that. And I remember, like, the person at the pharmacy desk, she was sitting in a chair, which they're not even supposed to have chairs back there. She's sitting in a chair. She didn't even get up. I gave her the prescription. She looked at it. She's like, "We don't have this." And she just like gave it back to me. And, you know, instead of, you know, there's another CVS 10 blocks away, she could have said, "Let me call over there and see." Like, you know, she sees like I'm basically limping in. And so I wrote an email. I ended up getting a big gift basket. Of course, I had a line into executives there because I was working on the account, but it was just, it kind of gave them a view into what was really going on in the field, that not everything that they were training had yet stuck with the new CVS. But I'm happy to report, you know, they're really strong down here, and, you know, ultimately, you know, all of those operational things that were real trouble with Eckerd went away. But that's a digress. But you're right. I thought about that because I wrote a long email. When you sit down and say, "This is what happened on such and such a day at such and such a store," like, this person doesn't have any reason to fib on that. Like, they want to tell.
It's usually the extremes. I loved what you did. Someone went out of their way for me, or I was treated like dirt.
Which is interesting because the Chick-fil-A campaign that's running right now, a lot of it is those love stories from consumers that said, "This crew member from Chick-fil-A went out of their way to, I dropped something in the drive-through, but the guy recognized me and he held it till the next time I came through the drive-through and he gave it to me." I've seen stories like that. And, you know, those are probably, you know, mined from the emails that they get at the corporate headquarters.
It's a version of testimonials.
Yes.
You know, and this is valuable. I can't get the word out. Valuable information for a brief writer or a marketer who writes briefs. So good stuff.
Yeah. And then another thing is to go in the field, right? And go to the grocery store, look at the aisle where the competitors are and your target brand is. Talk to consumers in the aisle of the grocery store or at the car dealership or whatever it is. You know, try the product, sample it. Like, if you're at a car dealership, you know, take a test drive. You know, I'm telling you off the air, you know, I took a bunch of creatives that had been working on Lincoln to go test drive the Lincoln vehicles. You know, they hadn't done it, and they had been working on it for a couple of years. So it's good to get a feel for, like, oh, I know all the promises that the brand makes, but I've never really seen them fulfilled in the product because I've never really sampled the product. So having a good working understanding of the product and its different line extensions and so forth is a good thing. And then the last thing, and it kind of alludes to that email and the social media listening, but it's also internal in the agency, is to have your ears open, because there are people on the account team that maybe have been working on the brand for a long time, or they have some particular valuable insight. Some creatives might have a specific thing that they think, and they've never had an audience of somebody that would listen to them and say, "Here's what I think about X brand that we're working on together. Nobody's ever asked me, but I've been working on it for 2 years and this is what I see." So having your ears open for input from even unlikely places, to me, is important. So all of this, in a way, is just to get up to speed with and to do it quickly with a brand that you're now going to be working on and at some point going to be writing a creative brief for.
You got to listen to the Brief Brothers, because it's one-stop shopping for everything you need to know to get a good brief started, even before you put pencil to paper. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.